In this episode of Biblical Unlocks, we will go through a chapter of the Bible and make it make sense in your life today. Studies routinely show that reading your Bible regularly significantly lowers symptoms of depression, anxiety, and anger, whilst also increasing forgiveness, compassion, and a sense of purpose. So if you enjoy episodes like this, please consider following and rating the show. It's free, helps me out a lot, and you can always change your mind later. Enjoy the show. So, welcome to another episode of Biblical Unlocks. Today we're going to be going through Genesis chapter 13, and it's going to be a very interesting and theologically rich story because we're going to see exactly how God's promise is lived out in everyday choices. I think it's going to be very interesting because there is going to be a difference in two characters that we're going to see here, Abram and Lot, and our job is to identify the differences between these two characters, their heart posture, and whether or not we strive for comfort or we strive to fulfill God's word regardless of the consequences. So we're going to go through a chapter of the Bible now and see it. So it's Genesis chapter 13. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him, into the Negeb. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. He journeyed on by stages from the Negeb as far as Bethel, to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called on the name of the Lord. Now Lot, who went with Abraham, also had flocks and herds and tents, and the land could not support both of them living together, because their possessions were so great that they could not live together. Thus strife arose between the herders of Abram's livestock and the herders of Lot's livestock. At that time the Canaanites and the Perizzites lived in the land. Okay, so how does Abram respond to God's presence after Egypt, and why worship before possession matters? Okay, so worship before wealth. I want you to remember this. Abram, at the beginning, in last episode, in chapter 12, I'm pretty sure, Abram built key altars at key locations, at Bethel and Hebron. In response, after the Egypt episode, after what occurred in Egypt, right, where he made a mistake with Pharaoh, there was a pattern of placing God at the center before settling in. Abraham's first response is to always place God in front and center. That is his pattern, to make sure that God is in the midst of everything. And important here is anytime you see an altar, that marks a covenant encounter. So let's go to Genesis chapter 12 verse 7, and when we take a look at Genesis chapter 12 verse 7, we read, "Then the Lord appeared to Abram, to your offspring I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him." So anytime you see a covenant, you see an altar. And the idea here is altars represent boundary stones of faith. That is to say that Abraham's worship models how the people of God should mark transitions, right? Transitions from moving from Egypt to another place, making sure you're walking by faith and not by sight. We talked about this last time, but with praise and dependence. Now, we'll see something similar in Joshua 4 verses 1 to 7. Joshua 4 verses 1 to 7. When the entire nation had finished crossing over the Jordan, the Lord said to Joshua, "Select 12 men from the people, one from each tribe, and command them to take 12 stones from here out of the middle of the Jordan, from the place where the priest's feet stood, carry them over with you, and lay them down in the place where you camp tonight. Then Joshua summoned the 12 men whom he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe. Joshua said to them, "Pass on before the ark of the Lord your God into the middle of the Jordan, and each of you take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, so that this may be a sign among you. When your children ask in time to come, 'What do these stones mean to you?' then you shall tell them that the waters of the Jordan were cut off in front of the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed over the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. So these stones shall be to the Israelites a memorial forever." So a memorial. This is very similar to the altar stones that we've seen before, and again marking boundary stones. They're marking boundary stones of faith. Okay, let's read it, verses 8 to 9 in Genesis 13. Then Abram said to Lot, "Let there be no strife between me and you, between your herders and my herders, for we are kindred. Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will take the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left." Lot looked about him, and saw that the plain of the Jordan was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward. Alright, so Lot chose for himself all the plain of the Jordan, and Lot journeyed eastward, and they separated from each other. So we can clearly see that there is a dispute between the herdsmen, right? And it's worrying Abram so much that he proposes a peaceful delegation and separation to allow for peace to ensue. No more, he doesn't want violence, obviously. And what this represents is humility, right? Abram's humility and leadership in this particular instance, it allows peace to prevail over prestige, over strife, over greed. And this is really important because this is exactly what Jesus commands us to do. In his Sermon on the Mount, what does Jesus say in Matthew chapter 5 verse 9? He says, "Blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God." So blessed are the peacemakers. In this case, peace ensued because one person was able to say, "You know what? Whatever you want to do, you do. Because I know that if we start bickering, if we start comparing, if we start giving in to the same level of strife that is arising between the livestock, because you can see here, because of their possessions, because their possessions were so great they could not live together. And it's because of the comparison aspect, the possessions aspect, the fact that they're not trusting in God. That is to say that these herders, they think that they are their ultimate providers, and when you think you are your ultimate provider, guess what? You're going to end up in strife because you think that what you're dealing with right now the blessings that you have, the success that you have, is temporary, and because of that, you're trying to compensate, and by compensating, you're trying to create strife between people. So strife arises when trust ends. Trust between God, because if you truly trusted in God, you'd know that He had have a purpose in your life. Even if strife and even if difficulties arise, you'll know that it's building your testimony. That's what true trust would be, and this is what Abram is showing. You say, you know what? You want to go to the best place, the best land, the Jordan, everything here. Go ahead. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. Okay. So this is how he's delegating this situation. So again, peaceful separation here, redemptive boundary making, and this is important because sometimes holiness in this case is not represented by complete domination. Okay, it's just peaceful submission, submitting to someone else. Okay, I'm going to read onwards from verse 12. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the plain and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the people of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. Okay, so we see great sinners against the Lord, Sodom, and Lot's eyes, right? When you saw Lot, like he was drawn to the gardens, he was drawn to the Jordan, the plain of the Jordan, because it was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So he chose the garden of the Lord like the land of Egypt, and he chooses proximity to Sodom. Okay, that is to say that he chose a land and a plain which was close to Sodom. This is important because the author is illustrating something important, that his choice here is risky, morally risky. That is to say that he has chosen a situation or a place which is close to another city which is extremely, or where the people are extremely wicked and great sinners. So even though it's a comfortable choice, he knows very well that this choice is going to have a higher chance of resulting in great sinfulness on his part. So he's going to a land where there is a higher chance, because the text is bluntly noting that that Sodom is greatly sinful. Okay. I'm going to read Proverbs chapter 22 verse 3 to help you build your understanding and your wisdom insofar as how do we make good choices and how do we not fall into bad choices. Proverbs chapter 22 verse 3. Alright, Proverbs 22 verse 3. The clever see danger and hide, but the simple go on and suffer for it. The reward for humility and the fear of the Lord is riches and honor and life. So take a look. The clever see danger and hide, but the simple go on and suffer for it. So here we know there is a danger there, but when the wise person sees danger, they hide. But when a foolish person sees danger, they continue to go and they suffer for it. And we're going to see the consequences of Lot's choice later on. So in this case, Lot has chosen comfort over the covenant. And what this foreshadows and what this is going to explain is proximity to prosperity compromises your calling. I'm going to say that again. Proximity to prosperity compromises your calling. That is to say, if you are trying to live for comfort and prosperity alone, you cannot, and I repeat this again, you cannot serve God. Because what does Jesus say in Luke chapter 16 verse 13? In Luke chapter 16 verse 13, I'm going to read this. No slave can serve two masters, for a slave will either hate the one and love the other, or be devoted to the one and despise the other. And Jesus says bluntly, you cannot serve God and wealth. You cannot serve God and wealth. That is to say, you cannot have two idols in your life. The only person that can hold the position of worship in your life is Jesus Christ. That is it. God is the only one. Otherwise, we are simply people, right? If we do not put God front and center in our lives, we are simply people trying to seek Jesus in things that do not fulfill us. We are trying to seek Jesus in money, in relationships, in whatever, hobbies, in our work, in our studies, in things that do not satisfy us. Okay, we're going to read verses 14 to 18 and we're going to summarize. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated him from him, raise your eyes now. So he's saying to Abraham, and look for the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring can also be counted. Rise up, walk through the length of the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. Again, notice, an altar was built as soon as there was a covenant between him and the Lord. But he says, for all the land that you will see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. This is a Genesis 12 promise that he's going to make. That he's going to have everything. You see that? You're going to make your offspring like the dust of the earth. Imagine if someone told you that. You would laugh. Of course. You're not going to believe that. Why would you believe that? But that's not what God is calling. God is calling you to walk by faith, not by sight. Not by what you see, but what you believe. Okay? So, God is reaffirming the promise that he made in Genesis chapter 12, and Abraham simply responds by moving his tent and building an altar, not by fighting, not by having skepticism, not by confusing himself and saying, you know what, maybe it's not, or overthinking. No, he just moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre. That's all he did. Okay. In fact, this is such a good example of using faith, or the use of faith in the Bible. Now, if we see in Hebrews chapter 11 verse 8, by faith Abraham obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance, and he set out not knowing where he was going. Alright? This is the faith of Abraham. He obeyed when he was called to set out for a place that he was going to receive as an inheritance, but he did not know where he was going. This is the key example in the Bible of someone who walks by faith and not by sight. That is to say, he had no idea where he was going. He had no clue what was going to happen. And what God is telling him seems completely preposterous, and yet he's still going. He still moves his tent. He still moves. Why? Because he's walking by, should I say again, walking by faith and not by sight. So, God's word to Abraham after loss anticipates the pattern of covenant faithfulness. God speaks to us. However, the believer may not initially see it, but he still believes. Believe. That is the important thing here. Because Abraham's lift up your eyes invites faith, right? He says, lift up your eyes, raise up your eyes now, and look for a place from the place where you are, northward, southward, and eastward, and westward. For all the land that you see I will give to you, and to your offspring forever. But notice, there's a really important point to be made here on pride. Abraham didn't do this. What does it say? I will make your offspring. I will give it to you. Because people are like, oh, I would love to have all this land, northward, southward, eastward, westward. I would love to have all of these things. Sure. But God needs to be front and center. God is the one who gives everything to you. It is through God that you can do anything. And without him, you are nothing. That is the level of humility. I will make your offspring like the dust of the earth. Remember that he was going to make all of his offspring like the dust of the earth, but you yourself are made from dust, and unto dust you shall return. That is who you are. A few things I want to say before I end this episode. The first one is you should worship first, settle second. Every time that there was a covenant made between Abraham and God, an altar was built, so he prayed. But the more important thing is that there are some good-looking options in your life which are spiritually risky. So are you forsaking the covenant due to pleasure and comfort like Lot, or are you walking by faith and not by sight like Abram? So that's it for this episode of Biblical Unlocks. This show is designed to help you keep up your habit of reading the Bible, understanding the Bible, and applying it in your daily life. I upload daily, so if you don't want to miss tomorrow's episode, feel free to rate the show and follow. Otherwise, just have a blessed day. And always remember, if you're not in your word, you're in your feelings. Godspeed.